This episode is brought to you by TBS. It's October, and that means the MLB postseason is back on TBS. You can watch the biggest and brightest in the American League take the field and battle it out for a spot in the World Series. There will be crazy hits and clutch performances, jaw-dropping action from the Division Series on October 11th, and, of course, you have to watch the crowning of the next American League champion. Catch the best of the MLB postseason all month long on TBS.
Hello, welcome to another edition of the Ducks Confidential podcast. I am Oregon Ducks beat reporter for the Oregonian and Oregon Live, James Crepia, and we will go over on this week's edition of the program. We will go over Oregon's win over Stanford and take a look ahead to this week's matchup with Arizona, chat with Arizona beat reporter Michael Lev of the Arizona Daily Star, and get a early look at the Wildcats ahead of Saturday night's game in Tucson. But first, looking back at the 45-27 win for the Ducks over Stanford. And to be honest, for as much offense as there was, and there certainly was a lot on the ground for the Ducks in this game, it's kind of almost strange to say in a game where they score 45 points and put up over 500 yards and run for 351, the most rushing yards for them on a per carry basis in a very, very, very long time, particularly against FBS competition. But truly, and matter-of-factly, there's almost not much to go over, which is just kind of bizarre to say. But truly, this was as dominant a performance, particularly offensively and on the ground, as really you could draw up. And it's almost odd to say because of the series history between Oregon and Stanford, and that had so long been kind of the measuring stick for the division, and I realize we're now in a divisionless world, even though we're still in a division-based schedule. But obviously, Stanford has fallen on some hard times, injuries, and everything else that's gone on there. Some talent deficiency has really begun to sneak up on them, and just obviously things have gotten away from them a little bit. So Oregon was favored by 3 scores going into the game. And, for those who are interested in such things, they may just sweat that out a little bit at the end. But ultimately, no matter what the fourth quarter ended up playing out like, that, like I say, especially in the first half, was just a dominant performance, and could have been significantly a bigger lead, and even more in Oregon's control even earlier, if not for some early penalties and miscues and things like that. And that game could have easily been 28-0, almost in the first quarter. That was just a really dominant performance all around. So, starting first and foremost in the big picture with obviously the ground game, Bo Nix putting forth a career day. Even if you take the 80-yard run out of it, which is, if you take out the biggest play of the game, but truly, even if you take that out of it, he still would have had 5 carries for 61 yards. And one of those was, of course, a sack, the first allowed by the Ducks all year, for a loss of 1. So if you take out the 80-yard upside and you take away the 1-yard sack on the downside, he still had 4 carries for over 40 yards, over 10 yards a carry. So closer to 15 yards a carry, really, around 60 yards. So point is, a dominant day was had even when you take out the highest of highs and even the 1 sack. A dominant day on the ground for Nix. A strong day passing, not the greatest. They did not connect on several deep throws that they had. Some really kind of, if you want to, I don't say blame, but if you want to say, all right, well, how come you missed this one? How come you missed that one? One, hey, the throw's got to be there. Hey, another receiver's got to get there. And on a couple of others, really for the first time in the season, we saw Nix, I would say, kind of force it a little bit. It ended up looking like double coverage for all intents and purposes at the end. It wasn't double coverage the whole way, just because of the way that Stanford was playing it at the back end. But ultimately, the ball's got to get out a little bit earlier to avoid it looking like double coverage at all, and for it to just not end up the way it did on a couple of those deep throws. Having said that, because of the way Stanford was playing on the back end in the secondary, and because they generally do that across the board, they don't allow very many deep throws. They don't. They didn't entering the game, for as many points as they allowed and for, as rough a season as they're having. they make teams earn it. And, outside of, maybe one or two plays in their prior couple of games, the vertical passing game was not exactly an area that Stanford was allowing all these like 40 and 50-yard bombs. It just wasn't the case. So Oregon couldn't quite connect there, but they made up for it with 9.5 yards of carry. Like I said, that's still with with one sack allowed in the game. So having said all that, as I say, obviously Nix had a huge day on the ground in particular, 4 touchdowns overall, between 2 on the ground and 2 in the air. Bucky Irving doesn't end up getting in the end zone from a rushing standpoint, but 10 carries for 97 yards is also obviously a terrific performance. Noah Whittington, for that matter, 11 carries for 66 yards. And that's how you end up. How do you get with 9.5 yards of carry? Well, when 27 carries go for nearly 300 of those yards, that'll do it. And that pretty much explains it all right there. Defensively, and I realize again that Stanford got some points late to make it look a little bit better than it was. I thought this was a really strong game overall for Oregon, particularly in the tackling aspect of things. Yeah, there were a couple of missed tackles here or there, but ultimately, when tackling had been an issue again the week before against Washington State, some of that just created because Washington State puts the ball in space and allows their receivers to go, make plays in space, force the defense to make tackles in space. Stanford, really relies on its size a lot, and between Bennett Williams, who had a really, really excellent game. Yes, he got, if you want to say beat, I don't even really know if you say that he got beat per se on one of the late touchdown passes, which shows the throw from McKee on the touchdown to Higgins late shows exactly what, on the upside, what Stanford's offense could be capable of. And that's kind of the example of, you go, how in the world is this offense with this quarterback who's capable of that throw and has a receiving core with all this size and catch radius, if they're capable of that on the upside, my goodness, if they could just get out of their own way from sacks and, frankly, I'm not sure the slow mesh is really the best option offensively for them, given all that. But that's their problem. That's for them to sort out. Bottom line, as I say, I thought Bennett Williams played really well. Noah obviously forced the fumble that Noah Sewell recovers, and that obviously changed the entire game there late in the first half when it goes from a pretty competitive spot to just completely and utterly gets away from Stanford. When it's 31-3 at halftime, the game is over. I mean, there's absolutely no way that Stanford is going to mount a comeback at that point, and obviously Oregon, like I say, takes total control. And then in the fourth quarter, especially the final 8 minutes, but really for all intents and purposes, the entire fourth quarter, it was completely garbage time. And just a non-competitive situation. So that's why I say, as strange as it is to say, 500 plus yards, pretty matter of fact, not much to actually go over and assess. Truly, just a dominant performance. Christian Gonzalez played extremely well in coverage, has played very well, but in his toughest individual matchup so far of the season, he and others who matched up Michael Wilson, the Ducks did a terrific job keeping him contained. 2 catches for 14 yards. He was targeted 3 other times, and each of those 3 other times, Gonzalez was on him, and he came up, not completing the pass. There was a holding penalty on Gonzalez. The shame of it was that it was totally unnecessary, and that McKee was forced to throw it away, and it really was totally unnecessary on the play. But that aside, Gonzalez had a huge night. I think by my count, 2 of 6 when targeted for 7 yards against, again, just a bevy of really, really big and good receivers. So he had a big night. The secondary as a whole had a pretty big night. And like I say, Williams in a tackling capacity in particular, Brandon Dorless and Casey Rogers on the defensive line had big nights. Dorless in particular. All in all, you could count a lot of individual performances that were pretty good in this game. The one, of course, major thorn in the side for the Ducks and the game as a whole, and an issue that we will obviously discuss quite a bit this week, and probably into the bye week, quite honestly, because it's something that has gone on for the entire first half of the season, and it just gets really away from them in this game, was the penalties. I mean, 14 penalties for 135 yards. And I know everybody's got, no matter what fan base it is, whenever there's that many penalties, every call is terrible. Well, that's just not true in this game. It's just not. There were basically hardly any of those 14 were even remotely arguable. For everybody who wants to freak out about the horse collar tackle on Steve Stevens, that wasn't. I mean, frankly, you got to be kidding. Who cares? Yes, it was a bad call. You're right. It netted Stanford a grand total of 5 yards, and on the next play, Oregon scores an 80-yard touchdown from Bo Nix. So, of all the penalties to, blow a gasket over, that's not the one. If it was one that actually had any kind of tangible impact on the game, I'd say, boy, you really got a case. Take it to the Mets, but that just wasn't. I'm not saying just accept the bad call. Yes, that was not a particularly good call. But there were still 13 other penalties. And even if you take aside the snap infractions and false starts and those things because of on-field disconcerting signals or anything else between the offense and the defense, I don't just make an excuse for that. All right, contextualize that all you want. Fine. The two that are obviously egregious to me and that really Oregon has to clean up, absolutely has to clean up and can't allow to persist are the personal fouls and the post-snap stuff. Anything pre-snap with motions and all that, even offensive holding when offensive linemen are in motion and stuff and getting out in space. Again, these are things that are more corrected by technique or those sorts of things. The discipline stuff, when Chris Hudson gets a 15-yarder for tossing a ball at a Stanford player on a punt return. This isn't about making excuses. I don't want to hear about, well, an official is here, an official is there, he was trying to get it here. Hey, bottom line, was the other player there? Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, if you go back and look at it, one of the members on the sideline for the Ducks instantly, one of the members of the sports staff, I believe it was, instantly reacts and just knows before the flag even comes out that Hudson's going to get flagged for that. There's no question. So how about don't leave it up to interpretation or where a referee is or anything else. If you want to hand the ball to the ref, hand the ball to the ref. You want to ensure that there isn't another player there by happenstance or purpose? Don't do it. Don't allow it to happen. And that's one instance. The fighting call on McGee. I'm not down there. Obviously, we haven't spoken to Seven McGee, so it's not a matter of trying to sort out what he meant to do. Obviously, he tweeted out after the game he was standing up for teammates. That aside, the play happens. The ball gets stripped from him. Okay, his forward progress was stopped, so everything that happened thereafter, and Nick's trying to go make a tackle, and I'm not going to fault him in any way. All right, his helmet comes off, not because of anyone's fault. It's just kind of a happenstance thing. And then from there, the sideline gets involved and all the rest. Fine. But point is, the game's well in hand. There's no reason for any of it. Yes, when a hit like that happens on a quarterback and a helmet comes off, and even though Nix was fine, obviously, and it's near any sideline, if it happened on the Stanford sideline and, shoes on the other foot, guess what? The sideline's going to get involved. That is going to happen. But in this case, for Seven McGee to come from on the backside of the play, having been involved in it earlier with the ball being stripped, and to, what a coincidence, find the player who stripped the ball from him, who had nothing to do with the hit on Nix. And then, whether you want to say it's a shove, whether you want to say it's a half a punch, whatever. Again, just don't even put yourself in the situation. It doesn't matter about the context. Again, if the shoe's on the other foot, Oregon fans are freaking out that the Stanford player did it. And I know Fields tossed the helmet. It's not a matter of defending of calls that didn't happen or this. I'm talking about 14 penalties for 135 yards. That's it. And one you can object to all you want, and it still doesn't make a lick of a difference in terms of overall outcome or sequence to the score of the game. The others that are totally within Oregon's control, particularly discipline stuff, those are things that have to get fixed and have to get addressed. Because against a team who doesn't have a massive talent deficiency, when you're at home and in control of the game, those are penalties that are going to cost you badly. if you think that Oregon can commit 14 penalties for 135 yards against Utah in November, I don't care where that game's being played. I don't think so. So those are things that Oregon has got to correct, and frankly, would probably have to even correct even this weekend, because Arizona is not a great team. They are not loaded with talent. They're still at the beginning of a building process, but as we'll discuss with Michael Lev here in a couple of minutes, they are still really talented at receiver, extremely talented at receiver, and could pile up some points. They're throwing the ball all over the park. And Jaden Delore is a mobile quarterback, and he's going to shift the pocket. And again, obviously, I don't have to remind everybody with him because he played at Washington State for a couple of years. You know what you're getting with him. They are throwing the ball extremely well. They have probably the deepest receiving core at the top end of things from a talent standpoint, maybe in the league. They're certainly putting up the numbers to back it up. And if this becomes a shootout at Arizona, and where not many things go Oregon's way the past decade, that's not the kind of game you want to be in general, and especially if you're going to commit a whole bunch of penalties. So plenty of things for Oregon to clean up. Having said that, though, like I say, really a matter-of-fact win outside of that, with obviously a dominant running performance. And that's a main positive heading into this game with Arizona, where not just, the outcome and putting up 350 rushing yards. Arizona's run defense is terrible. That is one area where the Wildcats are really susceptible. And with Oregon coming off of a performance where a defense who tries to keep the lid on and who forces you, in this case, to run a bit, and they have that kind of a success, to now be going up against a team on the road, to be going up against a team who can't stop the run. You have kind of that safety valve that's there at all times almost, where Oregon should feel extremely confident that it can run the ball pretty much at will on Arizona. It would be borderline stunning if they didn't. I'm not saying they're going to put up 350 and 9.5 a carry again, but it would be truly amazing from a statistical standpoint if Oregon doesn't top not just 100, probably 150, maybe even north of 200 yards rushing at Arizona. And historically speaking, if Oregon tops 200 yards rushing, they're not losing the football game. So, and unless Arizona comes forth with far and away its best defensive performance of the season, it will be very, very hard for Oregon not to win the game just based on that. Forget about anything else. Forget about penalties. Forget about turnovers. Forget Arizona's passing game, anything else. If Arizona can't stop Oregon's run game, which is playing at an extremely high level right now, top 10 in the country, then it's going to be a long night for the Wildcats. And that's one thing that the Ducks can certainly feel, again, very, very confident in heading into Saturday night's game in Tucson. We will take a look ahead to that matchup and to get a look at the Wildcats from Michael Lev coming up. And we welcome to the program this week to take a look at the Arizona Wildcats, Arizona beat reporter for the Arizona Daily Star, Michael Lev, who you can follow on Twitter as always at Michael J. Lev. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hi, James. How are you?
Doing well. Appreciate you for giving us some time this week, Michael, and give us a look at the Wildcats. Well, let's start on the most broad picture in general, because, and I think you can obviously understand this, Michael. I'm sure as you had to endure some pretty bad football at Arizona the past couple of years, for many of the Ducks fan, they remember last year's game. They remember that it was closer than they ever wanted it to be. They remember that Arizona played a certain way and they played multiple quarterbacks and guys got hurt and it was 2 and 3 tight end sets and really kind of a trudging kind of a game, and that they felt angry and annoyed leaving the stadium, and Arizona felt pretty good. And then they stopped paying attention because Arizona lost a whole lot of football games after that, even though things started to look, better at times, but there was still a bunch of losses. Having said all that, that's all they remember. And for those who had not been keeping track, Arizona is nothing like the football team that was at Hudson Stadium last year because of just the sheer volume of roster churn. So in the 30,000 foot perspective, give Ducks fans who have not been paying particularly close attention to Arizona the past year, a very broad view of exactly how different this Arizona team is than even a year ago.
Yeah, that is literally true. Arizona has turned over roughly 45% of its roster. Since last year, I believe the total is 51 newcomers. And I think the roster right now is sitting at 110 players total. So nearly half. And that was all intentional. There's only so much that Jedd Fisch and his staff could do in year one. He got here in late December. The pandemic was still going on. He conducted his first, media interface here via Zoom. So that just gives you some context of where things were. And he pretty much kind of rode with the roster that was here. They brought in some guys in the portal, but they didn't have a full recruiting class. They didn't have a robust group of walk-ons. Well, they went to work. From there, they made a lot of changes. Some of them have been really impactful. A few examples, Jaden DeLora, I think everyone knows who he is. Transfer from Washington State, threw 6 touchdown passes this past week, threw for 484 yards against Colorado. Jacob Cowing, the wide receiver from UTEP, guy that everybody wanted, and has lived up to his billing and then some. He's on pace to shatter the school record for touchdown receptions. And then Hunter Echols is another one from within the conference, from USC, who's really been that impactful pass rusher that this team needed and was lacking. They have 3 wins, which is 2 more than they had all of last season. There's a bunch of different stats you can look at. Touchdowns scored, turnovers caused, where they're already, they've already eclipsed last year's totals, or they're well on pace to blow past them. So this is a different team. It is a much better team. That doesn't mean that they're capable or ready to beat Oregon, but I think they'll put on a pretty good show on Saturday night at Arizona Stadium.
At 3-2 at this point, with wins over San Diego State, who, if anything, they might be one of the disappointing teams on the West Coast, given the year they were having, but be that as it may. A rallying win over North Dakota State, who I realize it's FCS, but obviously they're usually the class of the FCS, to where, quite frankly, Arizona was an underdog in that game, a home underdog. And that was a heck of a win, quite honestly. And yes, last week's win over Colorado with loss to Mississippi State and Cal. That's Arizona's record. So at 3-2, heading into a stretch where on paper right now it's 5 straight ranked opponents. By the time they play Washington State, it might be 6. What is the feeling like at this point around the program by way of, all right, here, I'd say they're probably even a little bit ahead of schedule at 3-2. Having said that, obviously the next 5-6 weeks is obviously defining the entire season, not just because, well, that's half the season, but yes, it's the half against whoever assembled this schedule by way of timing did not do Arizona very many favors.
No, it's really unbalanced in that way. People are calling it the gauntlet. People are calling it murderer's row, whatever term you want to attach to it. It is really rough. There is a bye week thrown in the middle there. Half the games are on the road. As you mentioned, 5 of the 6 teams are ranked. Their combined record is 26-4. It's not, inconceivable that Arizona loses all of those games. But, the way college football is, the way the Pac-12 has been, I think it's more likely than not that there will be an upset or 2 thrown into the mix. And if Arizona can do that and maybe go 2-4 in that stretch, they'll be playing for a bowl berth when Arizona State comes to town on November 25th. And that, I think, if you talk about being ahead of schedule, that's ahead of schedule. No one really thought Arizona was in position to possibly earn a bowl berth in year 2 under Jedd Fisch, which he's calling year 1 because he referred to last year as year 0 at Pac-12 Media Day. So kudos to them if they're able to pull that off. It's going to be really hard. They're going to be underdogs in every single game. They're relatively healthy right now. Who knows what toll injuries will play over the course of this difficult stretch. But if they can do that, it'd really be something, and it would just kind of continue the momentum that's been building over here.
If they go 2-4 over the next 6 games, and at that point, I would be mystified if they didn't win the Territorial Cup at the end. If they get to 6-6 by the end of the season, Jedd Fisch is the coach of the year in the conference. There's not even a question. There's not even a remote argument in my mind. That would be an absolutely remarkable job if they were to actually get the 6 wins. Because exactly to your point, because the talent deficiency that he inherited, and this team really, quote unquote, shouldn't be in position to get to that point by the end, particularly with just the sequence of the games. But regardless, at 3-2 at this point, I think they've done obviously a pretty nice job to begin with. We'll see how it shakes out over the next several weeks in terms of what their season ends up being. But if they were to get there at the end, my goodness, that would be really spectacular. And if they're going to, it's going to be in part because, like you mentioned, Delora and obviously this passing game and Jacob Cowing and T-Mac McMillan, who obviously one-time Oregon commit, and Cowing was a guy who Oregon and virtually everybody else in the country pursued in the transfer portal too. So a really talented receiving core. Stylistically, this is nothing like the offense that they played last year because of the change of quarterback and the overhaul of the receiving core. Again, for those who have not just had a chance to see them a lot just yet, Michael, how would you describe this passing attack? Because people know of Delora. Obviously, they remember him from the Washington State couple of games that they played in the series, the past couple of years with them. So they know that he can has escapability, can move the pocket, probably leaves himself open to some mistakes here or there as well. But at the same time, he's second in the league in passing yards right now. He is really whipping the ball all over the place and has a lot of receivers to turn to. How would you describe, beyond just the production, how they have gone about being this prolific in the passing game?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it is this is the offense that Jedd Fisch wanted to run last year and couldn't for much of the season for a variety of reasons, and one of them being ineffective play at quarterback, injuries at quarterback, just overall instability at that position. They didn't have nearly as many imposing weapons at wide receiver either compared to what they have now. We should mention, Dorian Singer is kind of the homegrown product in that group, and he's done really well. Also, he's kind of right behind Jacob Cowing in a lot of categories. Doesn't have nearly as many touchdowns, but very good in his own right. A kid who had kind of a weird recruitment. He was committed to Texas or was just about to commit to Texas, and they fired their coaching staff and was kind of thrown into recruiting limbo. Came here as a walk-on, quickly earned a scholarship, became a starter halfway through the season, hasn't looked back. But they're doing a lot more damage in the intermediate areas. That's one big change you'll notice, that space between the linebackers and safeties. They've done a lot of damage there going across the middle. Their yards after catch are way, way improved. Jacob Cowing is especially effective in that area. And then, both Singer and Tetsuroa McMillan are very capable of making, one-handed catches, contested catches, 50-50 balls. They're winning more of those battles. And then finally, they have an emerging tight end in Tanner McLachlan, another really good story, a guy who walked on from Southern Utah and rehabbed his knee injury that he had in the offseason by watching YouTube. A kid from Canada who wanted to play for Arizona since he was about 15, 16 years old and actually made that dream happen. He's been really effective too. So there's a lot of different weapons for a defense to contend with when you're facing this Arizona team. And we certainly couldn't say that a year ago.
Chatting with Michael Lev of the Arizona Daily Star to get take a look at things from the Wildcats ahead of Saturday night's game between Oregon and Arizona. Defensively, Michael, obviously there was such a talent deficiency, particularly at linebacker. We had discussed this over the years where Arizona obviously just let things really get away from them there from a talent standpoint under Kevin Sumlin in particular. So Jedd Fisch and his staff it was going to take some time to really not just churn the entire roster, but particularly on the defensive side. Now, they do bring in a Hunter Echols. We'll get to him in a second. But in the broad strokes, to this game specifically in an area where I'm sure the Arizona coaching staff is going to be spending most of their week on that side of the ball, is Oregon's coming off 351 rushing yards against Stanford, which is a nearly historic performance for Oregon perspectively, is particularly at 9.5 yards a carry. But against the Stanford run defense is not exactly saying much because they allow a whole bunch of yards in that for a while now. Having said that, this is an Arizona team who their major defensive deficiency is the run defense. And obviously, again, because of the talent perspective, they still have a big gap to close there. So how do you see them matching up? How do you go about, if you're going to try and create a roadmap by which Arizona is going to have any chance to contain an Oregon ground game? Forget about 350. That was a statistical anomaly in a really bad Stanford defense. I don't think that, repeating that necessarily. But even keeping Oregon under 200 yards rushing, which I can't imagine a way that Arizona wins this game without that. How do they pull that off?
Yeah, those numbers are very familiar to Arizona fans because they're almost identical to what Cal was able to do against Arizona 2 weeks ago. So a little bit of PTSD when you threw those out there. And yeah, it's a major, major concern in this game. No question about it. Arizona gave up 283 yards on the ground the previous week against North Dakota State. And I think most people chalk that up to, well, that's just the way North Dakota State plays. I mean, they run the ball 75, 80% of the time. They have all these tight ends and fullbacks, and they just do a lot of weird things. It's almost like facing, an option team, an armed services program. So maybe you toss that out the window. But then, they had the game against Cal, and it was a lot of issues with gap integrity, bad tackling. When you have those two problems in the same game, you're going to give up a lot of yards. So, can they remain fundamentally sound? Number one. Can they limit the really big plays? That's number two. And then I think number three is, can you force a turnover or two? I think there has to be a little bit of luck involved here. I feel like this is going to be a track meet type of game. Arizona's probably going to be involved in a lot of those over this stretch of games. And when you're in that type of ball game, sometimes the difference is a handful of stops, and that's kind of what the North Dakota State game was. They made 2 stops at the end, and that's how they were able to win. So, fundamentally sound, limit the really big plays, take the ball away a time or two, and you might have a chance.
If they're going to be able to pull that off, I would say that Hunter Echols is probably going to have to come through with the level of disruption that he's had so far. A USC transfer who's pretty much already surpassed the volume of havoc and production that he had during his USC career already this season at Arizona. Now, of course, put in a different role, different, kind of volume of reps and opportunities, and that's, I'm sure, what he was looking for. So, a young man who's put himself in a nice position is executing with it. For those who are not quite as familiar, give us an idea for, again, this is probably the one major individual matchup on that side where Oregon's offensive line was played extremely well, allowed its first sack of the season this past week. Again, going up against the defensive front who may not be that successful against the run, but from a pass standpoint in particular, Hunter Echols is the guy who, if Oregon's going to avoid disaster, avoid negative plays, it's going to be because they have to, really kind of scheme him out of this one. How has Hunter Echols been able to be as disruptive as he has been so far? And other than just throwing a whole bunch of double teams at him, how do you suppose Oregon might be able to neutralize him a little bit?
Yeah, Hunter Echols has been exactly what they hoped he would be. As you mentioned, played a lot at USC, but I don't think he was ever utilized in the specific role that he's in now, where he's kind of the guy from a pass rushing standpoint that they're trying to feature, that they're trying to open things up for to get to the quarterback. He's got 6.5 tackles for losses. He's got 3.5 sacks. I believe he had only 1.5 sacks in his time as a Trojan. Very good length at 6'5" and 250. He's been a really good leader and spokesman for that group as well. They play him at a position that they call the cat. She's spelled K-A-T for some reason. And it's a hybrid, linebacker / defensive end. So he will drop into coverage at times, but really his primary role is getting after the quarterback. And can he do that against a much better, Oregon offensive line? I feel like Oregon might have the best, most cohesive offensive line group in the conference. You can certainly tell me I'm wrong about that, James, but that's the way it feels from afar. Certainly up there in the top three, I would say. Colorado, they're probably in the bottom three and maybe at the very bottom. So there was just all kinds of pressure on Owen McCown last week. I think Pro Football Focus had them with 27 quarterback pressures, which is by far the most I can ever recall Arizona having in a game since they started tracking those types of numbers. So to me, I think Hunter Echols is going to do his thing. The question is who else is going to step up and provide some sort of a pass rush? Keon Barrs has been a little bit up and down after an All Pac-12 campaign last year. He's coming off of a foot injury. He's getting double teamed a lot. He doesn't have a sack yet. He does open things up for some other people on the inside. Paris Shand is a player I like a lot. He's a really good athlete, former basketball player, another Canadian. He's got 2.5 sacks. Made his presence felt last week with a sack and a fumble recovery. Jalen Harris kind of quietly does his job. He's fundamentally sound. He's always in the right position. He's good against the run. Only 1.5 sacks so far. Can he get to the quarterback and provide the support that Echols is going to need, because he can't do it all by himself?
Yeah, I would agree on all fronts. And that, I think Oregon's offensive line is the best in the league, probably one of the best in the country. And it's not just because of the caliber of teams that they've gone up against and this and that. Obviously, they didn't allow a sack against Georgia. So it wasn't just, they're doing it against, bad Pac-12 teams here or there or something. No. Frankly, as bad as Stanford may be, Wazoo's not, particularly that defense. Wazoo's going to cause a whole lot of havoc on defense, a whole lot, and they didn't allow a sack there. And they were passing the ball quite a bit. And again, Georgia's certainly not going to be a bad defense. So, no, I put them right on up there. And that's certainly not about as polar opposite as Colorado as it gets. Last thing for you, Michael, is that for a lot in the I don't know how many in the program anymore, but you tell me, and from the Arizona perspective, but for many of the Oregon fan, I think this is a series, but mainly just going to Arizona in general, because it's not just Arizona, it's also Arizona State. There's almost like a feeling of dread when the Ducks have to go to the desert the last decade plus, because something weird happens, some terrible outcome usually happens, a season-defining loss, something awful. So there's kind of like that feeling of, around things. Again, I don't know if that's anyone inside the program anymore, because the last time Oregon even went to Tucson, it was 2018. And while I was there, hardly anyone on the roster still is. So I don't know, especially the new coaching staff, virtually no players still remaining from that game. On Oregon's perspective, I don't think anyone inside the building feels that way, but I know many of the fans feel that way. On the other side, Arizona has every reason to feel like, this is, obviously going to be a monumental task inside the building and even among the fan base. But does the Arizona fan, does those who are, paying attention and will definitely be around on Saturday night, do they have a outsized degree of optimism because of history in this series where they have had some upset wins over Oregon and usually been the thorn in their side? Like I say, they've only met a couple of times in Tucson the last decade, but it has been since 2011 that Oregon has won in Tucson. Even if it's only 3 games, it's still that long, and it's still been that ugly and bizarre.
Yeah, I think that the anxiety on the part of Oregon fans is greater than the optimism on the part of Arizona fans in that regard. But you know what? Hey, who can have the greatest influence on that? It's probably the fans themselves. I think that's kind of maybe the X factor in this game, is can they create a real home field advantage? Can they kind of make things difficult for Bo Nix and that offense? Can they cause couple false starts at inopportune times and throw the Oregon offense off schedule? Arizona's going to need every advantage, every break that it can get to pull this off. And yeah, there is some really weird history there. how strange looking back is that 2018 game, which Arizona won 44-15 over a team with, one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL in Justin Herbert, who had one of his worst games. 24 for 48 for 186 yards in that game. It's almost unimaginable. And I think Oregon was favored by 8.5, 9.5, something like that. They were, I think they were ranked at the time. Arizona was not. It was just one of those nights.
That was one of the most bizarre performances, not just from when the talent on the field and everything else. It was bizarre in that, and we knew it immediately by way of that Oregon just completely abandoned its identity. Forget about how the score got away from them and then they couldn't necessarily run the way they wanted to. It was like they went in and just said, we're not going to do it. We're going to do things a different way, and we're intent on winning a different way, no matter how it gets. And then when it got away from them, they had no choice but to continue throwing. Then Herbert got hit high late at the end, and there was the hit on Dylan Mitchell and everything. So yeah, that was as wild an outcome by way of that, like you're saying, from a talent standpoint, there is no way to explain that score. There is absolutely no way imaginable. That was just bizarre and was probably the high point of the Kevin Sumlin era in Tucson, quite honestly, because that was as good as it ever got, I think, for them, and as absolutely mind-boggling a loss as there was for Oregon in the Mario Cristobal era, even though that was year one. And yeah, they had, obviously some nice wins during that year. They also had that one in particular was just a bizarre loss. But be that as it may, like I say, it's the first trip back since. So we'll see how it comes out on Saturday night. Looking forward to catching up with you again when we get there. And again, appreciate you for all the time here today to give us an early look at this one on Saturday.
Thanks for having me.